May it please the court, defense counsel, ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful for this opportunity that I now have to address you and be able to show you how the state has proven its case over the past week and a half. My intent today is to go through what we've heard all the way back to last Tuesday and show you why we know that the defendant in this case is guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Now, I'll be using the screen to help me with that. And so I'll be moving out of the way so you can see. We're going to listen to some audio as well. I know some of it is bad quality. You will have those recordings with you in the jury room. You can listen to them as many times as you want. A lot of the evidence I'll have pictures of on the screen. You will have evidence available to you in the jury room. If it is something that has blood or stains on it, you don't get that, but you can always request it and we'll bring you back in and you can look at it. What I would like to do, because there are so many people's names that you have heard in this case, I want to review who they all are, because frankly some of them from last Tuesday, you may not exactly remember who they are, so that's what I would like to do. In this case, we'll start with Melissa Howard. She's the victim in this case. She was married previously to Brian Howard, and at the time of this case, they were no longer married. They have a child in common named Taylor Howard. You heard Mr. Howard testify. He's now in his mid-20s. He was 11 at the time of this crime. Melissa has twin daughters from a previous marriage, Christy and Carrie Winkler. Christy lived with her dad in Tallahassee. Carrie lived with her mom here in Crestview. Melissa Howard was dating a man, before that, Carrie was dating Daniel Brett Howard. If you recall him, he was the taller gentleman. He was with Carrie that night. Melissa Howard was dating Christopher Cadenhead. I told you in opening, and he admitted on the stand in front of everyone that he was married and was having an affair with Melissa Howard. His wife is Sherry Cadenhead. You heard from her. She had to acknowledge the situation. I'm sure it wasn't comfortable. We've aired that out. Janice Burke is Melissa Howard's custody attorney. If you recall her testimony about the phone call that happened between the two of them. Brian Howard has an additional daughter named Skylar. And at the time of this case, he was dating Karina Schultz, who later became Karina Howard. She has a son named Tyler Schultz, and it was Mr. Schultz who the Azteca party was in honor of. He was about to be deployed, so they were having the going away dinner that night. Brian Howard's sister is Bobby Davis. She is married to Robbie Davis, who you heard from. He's the one we'll get to in a little while about the text messages between him and the defendant. Russell Holbrook is the defendant in this case. He is a friend of Brian Howard's. We will discuss that further in a few moments. And Russell Holbrook has a brother named Michael Holbrook. Michael Holbrook has a wife named Melissa Sully. You heard from her yesterday when the defense called her. And she also testified that Michael Holbrook has worked for Brian Howard. Allison Holbrook is Russell Holbrook's ex-wife. They were split at the time of this case. Allison Holbrook was living with Brian and Karina Howard at the time this case occurred. Gina Good was Russell's girlfriend at the time. Darlene Cooper was another ex-wife. And the defendant and Darlene Cooper have two kids in common, Danielle Blasberg and Ryan Holbrook. Now, since we have refreshed ourselves on who everyone is, I'm going to start going through the actual evidence in the case. You remember Christopher Cadenhead arrived in Melissa's house that Friday at about 6:10 p.m. He testified that Melissa went to drop Taylor off about 6:25 or 6:30 that evening, and that Chris was at the house slightly less than an hour. He stayed home, at Melissa's home, watching TV while she was gone, and then she came back. So, let's check out. Does his story make sense? State's Exhibit 22 are UPS records. Mr. Cadenhead drives a UPS truck. UPS keeps track of every single delivery that someone makes. At the bottom of this particular page, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen are dates and times. On the right side of the screen, you see addresses. He was in Crestview on the evening of January 6, 2006. And you can see that his final delivery was at 6:11 p.m. It matches. He was where he said he was. Mr. Cadenhead drove his UPS truck once his lunch break or dinner break was over, and he drove it back to Fort Walton Beach. He said he arrived about 7:50 p.m., and then about 8:05 p.m. he rode around in a friend's new car. They test drove it, just showing the new car. And he testified that he arrived home about 9 o'clock or 9:15. Well, let's check it out. Let's look at his payroll records. We can see that he finished his work at 7:57 p.m. that evening. It matches. It's what he said. He also testified that he had a phone call with Melissa Howard on his way home. Well, let's look at his phone records. You have those in evidence. State's Exhibit 45 are Verizon records for Christopher Cadenhead. You also have Melissa Howard's cell phone records in evidence. Her phone number, 902-2163, is in evidence. And you can see here that we have phone calls at 8:27 p.m. and 8:41 p.m. You see the 420, the laser pointer does not work on the screen. 420-1444 is Christopher Cadenhead, and the 902 number is Melissa Howard. We see they talked for 686 seconds, that's about 11 and a half minutes. 662 seconds, about 11 minutes. They talked back to back in those two phone calls. Sherry Cadenhead testified, and she said, yes, my husband did come home around 9-ish, 9:15-ish. I think those were her words. She wasn't positive, but it was somewhere in there. It corroborates what Christopher Cadenhead said. He testified that he took a shower, he got his hunting gear ready, and he played with his 3-year-old daughter. Again, that was confirmed by Sherry Cadenhead. He said that he had started to leave, but he forgot something, so he called his wife to bring it to him. She confirmed that, and if you go back to the same phone records, you will see that their phone number, their home phone number, 678-4844, is in his phone records at 10:18 p.m. That's the phone call. Honey, I forgot something. I need you to bring it out. After that, he went to the Texaco bait shop and the Tom Thumb. He was looking for coffee or energy drinks to prepare for his hunting trip. He also testified that while he was driving, he got a phone call from Sherry Cadenhead. His daughter had said a prayer for him or something like that and wanted to talk to him. And so that was at 10:48 p.m., which we'll look at in a minute. And he testified that he planned to visit Melissa, but he couldn't reach her. Now, I want to, in case you start looking through these phone records, any calls that didn't have a duration are not in his phone records. Phone companies keep track of records different ways, so you're not going to see those calls in his records. All right. Mr. Cadenhead said that when he arrived at Melissa's house, he found her daughter Carrie and Carrie's boyfriend Daniel outside. The doors were locked. They were eventually able to enter the residence by using Daniel Bretthauer's FedEx card key, and they were able to get in. You also heard that he called 911 using Carrie's phone, and you listened to it, and although it was really bad quality, you could hear that he was on the phone with 911, and he was calling his wife at the same time because he needed her in Crestview. She didn't know about the affair prior to that night. Heck of a way to find out. But he called her. He made that call and you heard it. You've seen crime scene photos in this case. That's a picture of Melissa Howard's house. That's 222 Tiffit Court. You recall the blood droplets that were on the front porch, the sidewalk. There were more that went down by the driveway. We now know from testimony that that was Melissa Howard's blood. The blood swabs, you heard them talking about A1 through A5, came from here. And so we know that it was Melissa Howard's blood that was being dripped as they walked away. This is what Carrie Winkler found when she got home that night. She found her mother lying against the far wall of the living room, laying in a pool of her own blood. We know the motive for this was not to steal valuables. There's a tray of jewelry in the open in her bathroom. There's a purse on the dining room table. Her killer wasn't after money. Clothing in her bedroom was strewn everywhere. It was pulled out of drawers, it was hanging off, it was on the floor, as if someone were looking for something. Or if someone were trying to stage a crime scene. Whichever it is, that's not how she would keep her bedroom. Daniel Bretthauer testified that her house was always neat. You saw the couch cushions, they were all disheveled. M&Ms on the floor, candles on the floor, all signs of quite the struggle in that house. Now I want to talk about the timeline. At 7:15 p.m., we know that Chris Caden had left Melissa's house. He'd been there about an hour, and he left. We know the phone calls between Chris Caden and Melissa Howard occurred at 8:27 p.m. and 8:41 p.m., and they were 11.5 minutes and 11 minutes respectively. That would take us to about 8:52 p.m. by the end of that phone call. Around 9 or 9:15 p.m., Christopher Cadenhead arrived home. And we know at 10:50 p.m. or 11 p.m., Carrie Winkler and Daniel Bretthauer arrived at Melissa Howard's house. I believe Ms. Winkler thought it was about 11. Mr. Bretthauer believed it was closer to 10:50, but it is somewhere in that window. If we look at 8:52 p.m., that is when the call ended between Melissa Howard and Christopher Cadenhead. 10:50 or 11 p.m. is when her daughter and boyfriend were outside of her house, and so we know at that point she was already dead. This gives you our window of the time of death in this case. We know the last time someone heard from her alive. We know when she had to have been dead by, because her daughter and the daughter's boyfriend were outside. Let's talk about Brian Howard. Melissa Howard dropped Taylor off with him at Azteca. Taylor recalled it being about 7 o'clock. Karina believed it was a little before 6:50. Remember, she had reservations for 7 at La Bamba's, so picking up Taylor would have been a little earlier. Brian Howard, Karina Schultz, Taylor Howard, Tyler Schultz, and Skylar Howard then went to La Bamba's to meet the rest of the party, and that was the going-away party for Tyler that I mentioned. The party got moved to Azteca because there was such a long wait at La Bamba's, and they had a party of 15 people. I think we got up to 13 of the 15 people, so a lot of people to remember, but this is who it was. It was the people I've already mentioned, Tyler's friends, Jared Jones, Nicole Walters, family friends, Bobby and Robbie Davis were there, that whole group. After the party, Brian and Karina Howard dropped Skylar Howard off at a friend's house, and Karina called it a country road in the boonies, and then later thought it might have been Poverty Creek Road or somewhere off of Poverty Creek. Taylor rolled home with Allison Holbrook, who was living with Brian Howard at the time, and then Tyler, Jared, and Nicole arrived at Brian Howard's house later. First they went to Sonic, and they went to say goodbye, or for Tyler to say goodbye to Nicole's mother, again because he's being deployed. We look at Jared Jones' cell phone records, which is states 53. We'll see a call at 6:51 p.m. From 699-5831. That belongs to Tyler Schultz. And then if you remember, Nicole said that she used either her phone or Jared's phone to call her mom when they were about to head over so that Tyler could say goodbye. So we see a 9 o'clock phone call. That was the number she testified to. That was her mom's phone number, 758-7554. So we see somewhere in the 9 o'clock time frame is when the Azteca party was dispersing. Karina Howard testified that she was with Brian Howard the entire night, with the exception of a 5-minute trip to a gas station so that one of Tyler's friends could follow her back to the house. He hadn't been there, didn't know how to get there, so she left the house, never even stopped at the gas station. She testified she circled around and came back. But what about the smoke breaks? Did Brian Howard take smoke breaks while he was at Azteca? When he slipped away and murdered Melissa Howard? You heard Karina Howard. She said, "I smoked too. I was with him." Her testimony was very credible. She was with him the entire night, except for those 5 minutes. The visual representation, about 6:30 p.m., Melissa Howard took Taylor to Brian Howard. Sometime after 7 p.m., the party moved from La Bamba's to Azteca. In the vicinity of 9 p.m., the party dispersed. Allison took Taylor to Brian's house. Brian and Karina took Skylar to a friend's house, and then Brian and Karina Howard went home. 10 o'clock-ish, Tyler, Nicole, and Jared arrived at Brian's house. Let's talk about Russell Holbrook and Brian Howard. In his own words, they have been friends since 1996 or 1997. He's even stated that he's known Brian Howard longer than Michael Holbrook has, because Michael Holbrook lived elsewhere and then moved up here. So their friendship has been going on for a very long time. Russell Holbrook invited Brian and Taylor Howard to come see his new truck. Taylor told you that he knew what truck Russell drove because Russell had invited him to come over and look at it. Because Russell Holbrook and Brian Howard are friends. Russell Holbrook said that he had talked to Brian about Allison, but he didn't get enough details, so he wanted some more. So he clearly thinks that Brian Howard is a close enough friend to be asking, hey, can you give me details on my ex-wife? Carrie Winkler testified that Melissa Howard considered Russell Holbrook to be part of Brian Howard's circle. She also testified that Melissa was afraid of anyone in Brian Howard's circle, and Russell Holbrook was not allowed at the house. As I mentioned at the beginning, Russell's brother, Michael, also worked for Brian Howard. We know there was a custody battle going on at this time for Taylor Howard. You heard from Janice Burke that Melissa Howard was successful in petitioning the court for primary custody of Taylor. She was slated to get full custody on January 6, 2006, the same day that she was killed. 2 days earlier, she had a visitor. Ladies and gentlemen, did you hear how long that pause was? When was the last time you saw Melissa? Silence. For a long time. The defendant claimed he had not been to Melissa's house or even seen Melissa in years. Years! The truth is, he was at her house 2 days before her murder. That's not something you forget. That's something you're hiding.
Carrie was coming out defendant showed up shortly around that time.
Where did he have to come from?
Niceville.
Okay.
He lives in Niceville. He was a good part-time dad, so.
And he had made arrangements to look at his dirt bike?
Yes.
Okay.
So he showed up and we jumped in my truck and went to Defendant. We were supposed to meet at the Walmart there in, what was that, 331? I believe it's just north. I guess north I-10. Right by I-10.
What route did you take to Defendant?
I-10, if you know.
Okay.
After about 20 or 30 minutes, guy never showed up. So we headed back on, went back up 331 to 90 and took 90 to Crestview. And that's when we stopped on Melissa's house.
Okay.
So it was roughly, I would say probably close to 8 o'clock.
At the time that you pulled into Melissa's?
When we pulled into Melissa's house, somewhere around 8. I want to say I was home by 8:30 because I was gone right at 2 hours overtime.
Okay.
Pull in the driveway. She was just getting home. Her daughter Carrie. So she pulled in the garage. I pulled in behind her. Carrie got out, and there was a car on the side of the road, a little white, little two-door something. I don't know what it was. It was some kind of I'm not sure if it was male or female. But so I went inside with Melissa, and we went in the room, talked for probably 10 or 15 minutes.
What did you talk about?
A little bit of everything. Just, hey, how you doing? What's I'm doing? I'm sure you've heard this is what's going on with me. Talked about me and my domestic trouble with Allison. And a little bit about her custody problems with Brian. I guess they're still going through custody battles. And so she was telling me about that, and I was telling her what was going on with me, and I was basically giving her information.
We know the defendant lied about going to Defendant. Admitted that in a wiretap call. That was a lie they caught me in. We know he lied about going from Defendant to Melissa's house because Taylor Howard testified that he saw Russell's truck on his dad's road when his mom dropped him off that Wednesday night. In his February 6, 2006 interview, the defendant claimed he popped by to see Melissa after being in Defendant. When he was confronted with that, he admitted that he actually followed her to her house from Bryan's Road. He testified that his conversation with Melissa was just small talk. Hey, how's it going? How's it going with you? This is what's going on in my life. You know that's not what happened. You just said all they talked about was, hey, how's it going? Have you heard anything about Allison? Were they catching up after 2 years of not seeing each other? Allison Holbrook and Melissa Howard weren't close friends. Did you see the look on her face when I asked her if they confided in each other? No. They weren't close friends. They knew who each other were. There's no reason that Melissa Howard would have knowledge from Allison Holbrook about Russell and Allison's marriage. And she's certainly not going to be talking to Bryan Howard about it. This story, this is not what happened there that night, and you know that. Melissa Howard's attorney, Janice Burt, testified that on the evening of January 4th, which is when the defendant stopped at Melissa Howard's house, she returned a phone call from Melissa. Melissa had called the office a day prior. She hadn't had a chance to return the phone call, so she called from her parents' or in-laws' house in Defendant. She called Melissa Howard's house. Melissa Howard was crying, upset, talking very fast, and was scared. He just left. Who? Russell. I knew this would happen. Bryan sent one of his men over to scare me. Janice Burke told you that's what that conversation was about. Melissa Howard was terrified because of him showing up at her house out of the blue when he hadn't seen her in years. The defendant said, you need to let that boy be with his father. You need to let this go. That's why he was there that night. He was delivering a message. Melissa Howard was slated to get full custody of Taylor 2 days later. Out of the blue, Russell Holbrook shows up and says he needs to be with his father. You need to let this go. They weren't just catching up. The defendant's timeline for his activities that Friday changed every time he told it. And January 25th of 2006, he said he left the house at 8:30, stopped by Walmart, and was back by 9 o'clock.
From 6:30 all the way through to the next day, you stayed home. Except for at 8:30, I took my kids home. Okay. Everything else came straight back home. You stopped by Walmart and then back to the house. What time do you think you got back home? I don't know. Got to 8:30, you were back home at 9. So from 6:30 till the next day when you awoke, the only time you left your house was between 8:30 and 9.
And that version of his story, the only time he left his house was between 8:30 and 9. He left at 8:30, dropped his kids off, and was home by 9. That's not what he said on February 1st, 2006. He said he left his house at 8:40 or 8:45. He arrived exactly at 9 o'clock, stopped by now a gas station and Walmart, and then arrived home between 9:20 and 9:30, 9:15, 9:30.
Okay. Yeah, I understand you have to take your kids home, right?
Yes, sir. They had to be home at 9 o'clock. So it was roughly 8:30, 8:45. So I worked out till I got there exactly 9 o'clock.
Did Mike purchase anything?
No.
Okay. On from there.
I left there and went back to the house.
Arriving home about what time?
I'd say probably between 9:20 and 9:30. 9:15, 9:30.
It keeps changing though. February 7th, 2006, he will say that he left his house at 8:20. When the officer repeats it back to him, he says, no, 8:40, 8:40. Dropped his kids off right at 9 o'clock, stopped by a gas station or Walmart, and then arrived home at roughly 9:30.
What time did they have to be home?
They had to be home at 9.
Your kids? Alright, so you were going to take them home by 9.
Right.
Alright, you and your brother
Yes.
decided to drive the kids home. He was going to ride with you.
Right.
Anybody else ride with y'all?
Just me, him, Danielle, and Ryan.
Okay. So did y'all go straight to take the kids, or did y'all make any stops along the way?
No, not on the way.
Okay, and were you in your truck or his?
Yes, my truck.
Okay. Do you have like a back seat in your truck?
Yes.
Okay. Alright. So you all took the kids up there. Do you have any idea about time frame?
It was right at 9 o'clock when we got there.
Okay.
So I remember looking at my watch thinking I was going to be late.
Do you remember about what time you got home?
I want to say it was roughly 9:30.
And then you left there and went and came home.
Yeah.
And you thinking it's 9:30.
Only around 9:30.
Okay. Alright.
Well, like I said, the only thing I know for sure was it was right at, it was like, I remember we were getting ready to walk out the door at 8:20 because I'm telling them, come on, we got to go. It takes 15 minutes to get across town. If we don't get out of here, it's going to be after 9 o'clock. And I told them, Mom, I'd have them home by 9. And I remember pulling in the driveway and it was right around 9 o'clock.
You said you remember it being 8:20 when you were getting your brother and your kids?
8:40. 8:40. When I was trying to get everybody rounded up and going outside. I was standing at that door saying, it's 8:40, come on, get your junk, let's go.
That's not what he said. But it's fine. Now let's look at his interviews in relation to the time of death. In the January 25th interview, he says that 8:30 he left to take his kids home and stop by Walmart, and that he was home back at the birthday party that was going on by 9 o'clock. But then, on February 1st, 2006, he said, well, I left at 8:40, 8:45, left to take my kids home, stopped by a gas station at Walmart. At 9 p.m. exactly, I dropped the kids off. And then between 9:20, 9:30, 9:15, 9:30, I was back at home. Do you see what's happening here? His next interview, there's the question of did he leave at 8:20 or 8:40? He dropped the kids off at 9. And then he's home by roughly 9:30. See, in his first statement, he couldn't have committed the crime. He was only gone from his house between 8:30 and 9. In his second statement, we start seeing, wait, he's not home as early as he said he was. And by his third statement, he's now not getting home till roughly 9:30. More and more opportunity to commit the murder. Now, why would he start changing that? Because there's a problem. He wasn't even at Walmart until either 9:35 or 9:37 p.m. So, the fact that he told investigators I was home by 9, that's a lie. The fact that he said I was at Walmart and then I got home, by 9:20, 9:30, lie. He's not even at Walmart until now. Now, you'll notice the time stamps. The entrance and exit is 2 minutes faster than the time inside the store. Somewhere between 9:35 and 9:37 is when he arrived at Walmart. Robbie Davis told you that that is Russell Holbrook and Michael Holbrook going into Walmart. Leaving Walmart, which wasn't at the garden center, by the way. For whatever reason, he was adamant that he was checking in and out at the garden center. Be that as it may, he's leaving at 9:37 or 9:39. None of his timelines match the evidence. Not one. Because he wasn't even at Walmart until 9:35. So if he's leaving Walmart at 9:37 or 9:39, and I think it was 9:39 and 57 seconds, whichever way you want to say it, 9:39, 9:40, a few more minutes to get home, that video surveillance shows you that all of his stories are lies. Let's talk about his actual timeline. If he left to take the kids home at 8:20 or 8:30, both of which are versions of his stories, not my words, his. If that version of the story is true, the kids would have been home by 8:35 or 8:45 because he said it takes 15 minutes to get there. We know there was a phone call from the defendant to Gina at 9:29 p.m. And we know that he and Michael entered Walmart at 9:35 or 9:37. Ladies and gentlemen, Russell Holbrook had plenty of time to kill Melissa Howard before he went to Walmart. Under this scenario, he had almost an hour. Even if the kids were dropped off closer to 9. He still had half an hour to kill Melissa Howard before calling Gina at 9:29 and going to Walmart at 9:35 or 9:37. Ladies and gentlemen, Melissa Howard was 5 feet 6 inches and weighed 115 pounds. You've had the opportunity to observe the defendant. He's much bigger. We know he's military trained and he likes knives. Talked about the knives that he has, the special one from the Air Force. It would not take him long at all to subdue and kill Melissa Howard. He does not need hours upon hours to carry this out. He can go in, do it, and get out. Dr. Snyder testified that these wounds were very similar, same depth, same width. There were 2 stab wounds to her neck. This one on the screen, Dr. Snyder used his forceps to close the wound so you can see the shape of what caused it. He testified that hit her jugular vein, which is draining blood from the head. So basically you die from bleeding out because all the blood returning from your brain just spills out. The second stab wound was more under her neck. You see there it's being closed, again to show the contour of the weapon. And Dr. Snyder testified that that would have been near her airway, which could cause blood to get in it, and eventually cause her to start spattering. It's not coming out because of an artery pumping it, it's coming out because she's choking on her own blood. Let's talk about the blood spatter. You've seen pictures of it. It's very low to the ground. Very low to the ground. So when Dr. Snyder said that one way you get this is the airway, she's coughing it up herself. She's not going to die instantly. She was going to bleed out over several minutes. I think he said up to 15. This could be from her falling. The point is it's low. And remember, according to Dr. Snyder, these types of stab wounds would not be spurting out. The defense keeps asking, well, did he have blood on him? Wouldn't he be covered in blood? Not necessarily. Dr. Snyder testified you could inflict these injuries in quick succession, stab, stab, no spurting, because it's a vein. It only passively drains. This could also be the victim spitting out blood as it collected in her airway as she died on the floor. However, Michael Holbrook sure seems concerned about what's on his hands. Did you see it? Walking around acting fidgety. These are cell phone records that are in evidence. States 50 are records for Brian Howard. His phone number is 685-6540. His direct connect number is 186-116-20336. Michael Holbrook's phone records are Exhibit 47. His phone number is 699-7367. His direct connect number is 186-114-9319. Russell Holbrook's cell phone number is 685-5553. That's State's Exhibit 46. Gentlemen, Brian Howard and Michael Holbrook had 3 Nextel direct connects on Friday, January 6th, 2006. One was at 2:44 p.m., one was at 5:59 p.m., and one was at 6:15 p.m. Let me show you where that came from. On State's Exhibit 50, we see the direct connect numbers for Michael Holbrook on the right side of the screen. These are Brian Howard's records. There are the 3 from January 6th. Michael Holbrook also called his brother, Russell Holbrook, at 5:16 p.m. and 5:59 p.m. on January 6th of 2006. Let me show you where I got it. State's Exhibit 47, we see that is Michael Holbrook's phone records, and we see the phone calls to Russell Holbrook at 5:16 p.m. and 5:59 p.m. Now you may have noticed on the slide I had the actual seconds that the call was made. There's a different version of the records that show that it was at 17:59:52. So 5:59 and 52 seconds. Here's why it matters. Let's put these in chronological order. Michael Holbrook and Brian Howard had a direct connect that Friday, the same day Melissa Howard was killed, at 2:44 p.m. At 5:16 p.m., Michael Holbrook called Russell Holbrook. At 5:59:46, Michael Holbrook and Brian Howard had a direct connect. What is the very next thing Michael Holbrook did? Within seconds, he called Russell Holbrook. Michael Holbrook and Brian Howard had another direct connect at 6:15 p.m. What was happening about 6:15 p.m.? Getting awfully close to the time that Melissa Howard is dropping Taylor Howard off with Brian at Azteca. Are you starting to see the relationship among these three individuals? Let's talk about the sweatshirt. There's been a lot of testimony regarding DNA in this case, and I know it's overwhelming. I saw all of you taking notes and seeking to understand, and I applaud you for that. There's a lot of DNA material. We know that the B-20 sweatshirt, which is called State's Exhibit 17 here in court, was processed by Jennifer Hattler in September of 2015. She testified to the various swabs she took, BA through BH. She said that there was no foreign DNA on B20A or B20H. It was all Melissa Howard's. And then for B20C, D, F, and G, it was not interpretable. There was not enough information. There were some random DNA markers, but nothing that she could make an analysis with because there was too little data. She testified that the B20B exhibit was suitable for exclusion only. She couldn't say it matched anyone, she couldn't say anyone was included, but she would be able to use it for exclusion. And she testified that for that swabbing in the sweatshirt, she excluded Brian Howard, Karina Schultz Howard, Christopher Cadenhead, and ultimately Michael Holbrook. I say ultimately because you remember she had to check his DNA again later with a newer kit. It had 2 extra markers on it, and she could say, yes, Michael Holbrook is now excluded from this swab on the sweatshirt. B20E is the most important swab in this case, because that is the swab where we found his DNA. His meaning Russell Holbrook's. Now, at this time, in September of 2015, all Jennifer Hattler knew was this profile is foreign to Melissa Howard, and it does not match Brian Howard. It does not match Karina Schultz. It does not match Christopher Cadenhead, and it does not match Michael Holbrook. She didn't have Russell Holbrook standards at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, B20B and B20E are the only exhibits we've got usable DNA from. Those are the exhibits that matter, and specifically B20E. You heard testimony that YSTR testing was performed on B20E in March of 2016. Sukan Worf is the analyst in Jacksonville who specializes in that type of DNA, and it was sent to her. And she determined that the Y chromosome in B20E matched the Y chromosome for Michael Holbrook or his patrilineal relative. She testified that the Y chromosome is passed from father to son. So that means anyone in that patrilineal line will carry that Y chromosome. And very importantly, 2 brothers will share the same Y chromosome. So because this YSTR test showed that it matched Michael Holbrook, that means it also matches Russell Holbrook. The defense's own expert agrees with that, by the way. She said that if she had to complete a report, she would do the exact same thing Sukan did. She agrees. Sukan Worf, Candy Zulegger, and now all of you know that that Y chromosome matches Russell Holbrook, Michael Holbrook, and their family line. A search warrant was executed for Russell Holbrook's DNA in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where he was living at the time. Now that we have his DNA, we can compare it to the DNA results we already had. You recall State's Exhibit 30, which discussed the different alleles, the peak heights of DNA on B20E. I am not going to go back through every single marker because I think you remember it. But I wanted to show this slide because you can see there are 2 people present in this mixture. Remember, Jennifer Hattler was testifying that the pink squares are Melissa Howard's, the blue ones are Russell Holbrook's, and if they share, they're purple. Ladies and gentlemen, you know this is a mixture of two people. We also know that the defendant's DNA matched the DNA on Melissa Howard's sweatshirt. The frequency of occurrence is 1 in 39 million people. Which means if you were to randomly select someone from a population, the chances of it matching are 1 in 39 million. That is Russell Holbrook's DNA. And don't let the defense tell you otherwise. Now they're going to talk about, I assume, the contamination of B20L, which I told you about in opening, and I told you we would flesh it out. It happened. We have to deal with it. When the sweatshirt belonging to Melissa Howard was being processed, the first time it was for B20A through H. That was September of 2015. The foreign profile that was later matched to the defendant was developed at that time. The contamination occurred during subsequent processing on February 10th of 2016. That's when she was collecting swabs B20I through M. Ms. Hattler testified that she had been processing a sexual assault kit. The scissors for that kit did not get cleaned properly. When she made the cutting on the sweatshirt, it contaminated that sample. Jennifer Hattler is known to be meticulous. Even the defense expert acknowledged that. She's meticulous. How she handled the contamination shows just how good she is. She immediately recognized there was a problem. There's too much DNA here. I'm dealing with degraded DNA. All of a sudden I have off-the-charts DNA with this female. It's not Melissa Howard. She was able to recognize the problem, take appropriate steps to solve it. She reported it to her supervisor, it got forwarded up the chain, and you heard from the highest ranking member of FDLE, the forensic quality manager, who testified that this has been appropriately handled. They've changed how they use scissors in response to this. But ladies and gentlemen, the contamination of B20L has nothing to do with B20E. Nothing. The foreign profile of B20E was already developed. The subsequent contamination of a separate part of the sweatshirt has nothing to do with it. Robbie Davis was Russell Holbrook's best friend. He was on the stand talking about text messages between him and the defendant. I'm not going to republish all of them, but you will have them with you. It states Exhibit 55. There's a few I wanted to point out. This started because, in the defendant's own words, the FDLE, the rescue investigator, an Alabama state trooper, and an Alabama sheriff showed up at his house with a search warrant for saliva DNA samples. He was unhappy. Apparently it was graduation day, house full of people. Or he's unhappy that we're getting his DNA. Could be either one. Russell said, they went to talk to Michael today. Robbie responded, how'd that go? Man, he's changed his story 4 times, and they know it was someone with familiar DNA to his. Same dad. They took 2 different events, merged them into one, and they said, we have proof. They have proof we were at Walmart at 9:30, but we said we were home by 9. So that's why they took your DNA yesterday. Russell Holbrook said, they'll have my DNA ran in about a week and an arrest will be made. It's all BS. If that were true, they would have subpoenaed my DNA 10 years ago. I think they're at the end of the line and just trying to scare something new out of us. Robbie Davis said, well, to convince me, they will have to have your DNA on her. Other than that, it's the same old, you know. Russell then responded, there's no way of that. Robbie said, well, then they're just running in circles. And Russell's response, yep, looking like it is. In a different section, Robbie Davis tells Russell Holbrook, you tell me there's no way your DNA is on her, then it isn't there. Russell Holbrook said, they tried convincing me they have me on video coming out the front door of Walmart, which is a fat lie. No way they have my DNA on from the night of the murder. No way. Really? Robbie responded, in their head, they're convinced. I know you, and they're painting a bad pic. It's like I said, if you have it, use it. Holbrook responded, that's what they do. Don't you think if there was that DNA for me, I would have had a visible cut or scratches that would have been documented during the original investigation? Russell responded, I'm not asking for you to defend yourself, I'm just telling you. You don't have to convince me. Russell said, I know, just saying, it's retarded, waste of time. Just aggravating. Well, we do have a video of him coming out the front door of Walmart. We do have his DNA on Melissa Howard. He seems to be confused here that he would have had to have visible cut or scratches to leave DNA. That's not the only way DNA is left. It's left by saliva. There's other ways to leave DNA behind. No one said he got cut in the process. You recall the wiretap calls that we've listened to. There are a few portions that I'd like to play for you. You will have a disc of all of them if you wish to hear them again. There's State's Exhibit 27C. I'd like to play a couple portions from call 464 on September 27th of 2016.
How the hell could, there ain't no fucking way my DNA's all over her body.
That's what I told him. I said, I think you're lying. Oh, we can't falsify these documents. And he showed me this paper that it had highlighted 1 in 39 million. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's just a stock fucking paper. But whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that just doesn't even make sense.
No, none of it.
Because she would have had to been naked for that statement to be true.
Exactly. And I don't know. She might have been naked.
Yeah, and I that's what I was just going to say. Never know. She might have been naked. I don't know. But I can tell you Russell's DNA ain't anywhere on her body it shouldn't have been.
No, I haven't checked
Not that I wouldn't have, but I just know it's not.
Well.
You know?
She wouldn't have had to be naked for that to be true. Semen is not the only way to leave DNA behind.
What the hell does the Funiac have to do with it?
I don't know. They brought up the Feeney. I guess that's their way of telling me I'm a liar because I said that we went to the Funiac the day before, or a couple days before, and I didn't. So I don't.
I know where that's coming from now. That was the day I met her. That was the story I told Gina.
Oh, that you met her?
No, that I went to the Funiac to look at a dirt bike or street bike or something.
Well,
and that was the night I went and talked to her.
You just heard the defendant admit to you that the Defendant story was a lie. You heard his interview a minute ago where he's talking about the Defendant, and it's a lie.
Well, I don't remember being at no store with you and following her to her house. I've never.
Well, I mean, that didn't happen. I mean, that didn't happen because we went to, if I remember right, we went to Walmart and then we stopped at the gas station and got sodas and then went home.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Went to my, a couple days
before thing.
Yeah, well, we weren't even together a couple. That's what I was saying. I don't want to say it on the phone, but I can. Again, this is all. They're listening to what they're tapping one of our phones because that's come up based on some of the discussions we've had.
And it had to be yours. I don't think they can do mine because mine's not mine. I don't know how that works either. I don't mean my phone ain't under my name.
Right.
And
I don't know. And I know what happened a few days before, and that's why I know that whole story's fabricated.
Well,
because I mean that was That was the lie they caught me in.
Well, and I was just saying I was with you to protect you from your wife.
No, not that you were with me. That I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Remember, because I said I was in a different town doing something else, and they're like, "Well, we got this person that says they saw you doing this," and blah blah blah.
Right.
Anyway, there's a whole. That's what I want to tell you in person, because there's a whole lot to that that's way skewed from what they're saying.
Right.
By this point in the wiretap, the defendant is afraid to say things on the phone because he suspects law enforcement is listening to him. Suspected, right? You were. He wants to talk about it in person. I don't want to say it on the phone. Why wouldn't you want to say it on the phone? They're talking around it. He says, I know what happened 2 days prior, and I was somewhere I shouldn't have been. Wasn't supposed to be. That portion was call 1019. My clicker jumped ahead of me. Next is call 1037, also from October 11th of 2016.
Well, and that's why would they? Well, they can't prove. Well, and that's why would they? Well, they can't prove. So they can't prove that you were there, that you were with me. The only thing they can prove is that you were with me at Walmart. That's the only thing they can prove.
Right. Well, they can't even prove you were there.
Right, but that's what they're trying to say. That's what I'm saying. They're trying to say, "Oh, I've got his DNA," which means since y'all were together, you must have been there. No, that's not what that means.
They can't prove that you were there with me. The only thing that they can prove is that you were with me at Walmart. That's the only thing they can prove. Those are not the words of an innocent man. Ladies and gentlemen, we can prove more than that. It's what he's afraid that we can prove. It shows you he's guilty. Why else would they be discussing? They can't prove you were there. Only that you were with me at Walmart. That's all they can prove. Ladies and gentlemen, there have been a lot of statements by the defendant that were later revealed to be false. This is another one. As the judge has explained to you, there are 3 elements for the state to prove first-degree premeditated murder. One is that Melissa Howard is dead. That is obvious from the evidence. Number 2, the death was caused by the criminal act of David Russell Holbrook, and there was a premeditated killing of Melissa Howard. Now, the judge has told you that the premeditation is killing after consciously deciding to do so. So at the moment that you're doing the killing, you have to have the intent to kill. There is no exact period of time. It does not have to be weeks and months of planning. It can be in an instant, so long as there was enough time to allow reflection by the defendant. Now the judge will also, or has also, talked to you about lesser crimes. You only get to those if you decide the main accusation has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. There are 2 lesser crimes in this case: second-degree murder and manslaughter. For second-degree murder, the state has to prove that Melissa Howard is dead, the death was caused by the criminal act of David Russell Holbrook, and that there was an unlawful killing of Melissa Howard by an act imminently dangerous to another and demonstrating a depraved mind without regard for human life. In second-degree murder, premeditation is not required. Is the defendant guilty of second-degree murder? Yes, he is. This is a lesser crime, though. That is not all he is guilty of. Did he kill Melissa Howard? Yes. Was it unlawful? Yes. Was it by an act imminently dangerous to another? Absolutely. Did his actions demonstrate a depraved mind without regard for human life when he slit the throat of a 32-year-old woman and left her to die in her own blood on the floor? Yes. He's guilty of second-degree murder, but that's not all he's guilty of. Here is missing the premeditation element. You know from the evidence in this case that this was intentional. This was fully formed, conscious intent to kill at the time of the murder. The judge read the definition of imminently dangerous to another and demonstrating a depraved mind. Take into account, would a person of ordinary judgment know that this is reasonably certain to kill someone and is done from ill will or hatred or spite or an evil intent and is of such a nature that the act itself indicates an indifference to human life? You know that's true. Evil intent is all over this case. You can see it by his actions. The other lesser included crime is manslaughter. There are two elements, that Melissa Howard is dead and that the defendant intentionally committed an act that caused her death. Is he guilty of manslaughter? Absolutely. But that's not all he's guilty of. He's also guilty of second-degree murder, and importantly, he's guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Now, the judge also talked to you about principles. He told you that if the defendant helped another person or persons commit a crime, he's a principal. And he must be treated as if he had done all the other things the other people did if, number one, the defendant had a conscious intent that the criminal act be done, and two, that the defendant did something or said something that was intended to and which did incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise the other person or persons to actually commit the crime. Ladies and gentlemen, there are views of the evidence in this case where you start to get an understanding there may have been more than one person involved. The evidence shows that Russell Holbrook murdered Melissa Howard. But if you find that he helped someone else commit it, he's a principal and he's just as guilty as them. The judge also told you that you could actually even be a principal and not be present when the crime was committed. Now, we know in this case he was present. His DNA is on her. But he wouldn't have to be. In weighing the evidence, there are certain considerations that you can take into account. And the judge read a list to you. There's a few I'd like to focus on. Did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? Well, Greg Grover, the private investigator for the defense, drove the routes that the defendant supposedly took that night. The defendant never said which way he went, and Mr. Grover clearly has no concept of Crestview or its traffic. He cannot say how long it took the defendant to drive this route in 2006. He's not aware of the number of traffic lights taking one route versus the other. He doesn't know how the population has changed, how the traffic has changed. Are there additional traffic lights? He drove this route in December. We had a deposition, and then he drove it again in January of this year. What does that have to do with 2006? Nothing. Does the witness's testimony agree with other testimony and other evidence in the case? Well, with respect to when the kids were dropped off, Darlene Cooper said she wanted the kids home by 9, but she had no personal knowledge of when they arrived because she was at the marriage retreat. Danielle thinks they arrived about 9 o'clock. She wasn't sure. Her grandmother, Vicky Zapata, thinks the kids arrived between 8 and 9-ish, probably almost 9 because when she got off work, she wasn't positive. The defendant's inconsistencies we've been through. He took the kids home at 8:30 and he was home by 9. Or he left to take the kids home at 8:40 or 8:45, dropped them off at 9, and then he was home by 9:15 or 9:30. Or he took his kids home at 8:20. Nope, 8:40 actually is what I meant to say, and then I was home roughly by 9:30. The inconsistencies become quite the roller coaster when they're coming from him, because he changes his story every time. Has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or other benefit to get the witness to testify? Someone's been paid a lot of money to be here. Candy Zulegger, the defense DNA expert, testified that she makes $200 per hour for consultation and $240 an hour for testimony. I asked her, how much have you billed? She says she doesn't know. Really? You make $200 an hour, and you don't know how long you've worked on the case. You make $240 an hour to sit here in court, and she was here for the majority of the trial. How many hours? I don't know. She testified, well, I made $6,000 the first year. How about the second year? I don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, she owns this business. She didn't say it that way at first. She said, well, I perform consulting for Trinity DNA Solutions. And prior to that, I was their laboratory director. She used the third person plural. They, their, I do this for them. Trinity DNA is Candy Zulegger. They are one and the same. And somehow she has no concept of how many hours she's worked on this case, how much she's made. Is it reasonable that a business owner wouldn't know that? I submit to you, she doesn't want me to know, she doesn't want you to know. We know it was $6,000 the first year. There's been another year that has elapsed. We don't know how much she made. So the judge has instructed you that you can take this into account. Have they received any money? Well, yes, she has. At least $6,000. How much more? How much more for her to get up here and try to poke holes? She testified that the majority of her clients are defense attorneys. She owns the business. She would know. The judge has also read to you the instruction on reasonable doubt. And here's what you have to remember. Reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, an imaginary or speculative or forced doubt. Lots of things are possible, but it's not all reasonable. Ladies and gentlemen, this case, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. I think you already know. You've sat here for a week and a half. You know. The judge is going to show you the verdict form. It'll show you the charged offense and the lesser includeds. Premeditated murder is what he's charged with. Second-degree murder or manslaughter are lesser includeds. And below that is the line for not guilty. Now the judge either has or will instruct you that you are to select the highest offense that has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, which in this case, because of the testimony and evidence that you have heard over this week and a half, the defendant is guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Now this time, the defense has an opportunity to talk to you, give you their view of the evidence. I will have one final chance to speak with you and respond to what he brings up. Listen carefully, and I look forward to addressing you again in a few moments.
Thank you, Mr. Drake, and we're going to do that after, I think, 15-minute recess would be in order. I think that would be best. We'll be in recess for 15 minutes' time. Would you like to approach, gentlemen? Okay, okay, very well. We'll be in recess for 15 minutes' time.